Staying home seems to be working. In the past 24 hours, more people have recovered from Covid-19 than have caught it. It's the first time that has happened since New Zealand went into lockdown. The number of coronavirus cases jumped by 29 today, the fourth day in a row that there has been a day-on-day drop. The Prime Minister has announced from midnight tonight everyone arriving from overseas will be quarantined for 14 days. And for the first time today, there was some light at the end of the lockdown tunnel. With news, Cabinet Ministers will decide on April 20th whether the country will drop from Alert Level 4 to Alert Level 3. I spoke with the Prime Minister a few minutes ago and asked her if the decline in cases was cause for celebration.
Cause for cautious optimism, and I think, what we need to do is just keep seeing that trend. We saw the growth, we saw the stabilisation, now we need to keep seeing it come down.
Does it change any of your thinking, that number?
No. The plan has always been to try and get New Zealand into this position. But just because we are on track does not mean that anyone should change their behaviour. In fact, now more than ever, if we want to hold on to the success, we need to keep in level 4 all of the same rules that we have been to date, or we risk being back to the very, very start.
In fact, actually today you've toughened things up. People coming into the country will either be quarantined for 2 weeks or in supervised isolation. A lot of people wonder why you didn't do that earlier.
Well, we were doing that. We actually already have 1,000 people, roughly, who are in what we call this assisted self-isolation and roughly 150 in quarantine. Let me explain the difference, because there's not much of one. Basically, both groups are in hotels. The ones who are quarantined are ones who are being tested for COVID and are symptomatic, so they can't leave their rooms, whereas the others can take a walk around the park or a walk around the block, but nothing else. Now we will be doing that for every New Zealander that comes into the country.
Why not do it sooner?
Well, on the 20th of March, from the 20th of March till now, we've had 40,000 New Zealanders return. We literally could not have done it sooner with that quantum of people coming in, and that's because we haven't had literally the appropriate hotel space to have done this properly and safely with that number. Now our numbers are much smaller. We can do it properly and with everyone.
So you're looking at tracing apps as well and looking to Singapore here. You've got a conversation coming up with the Prime Minister there, Prime Minister Lee. What would you need to hear to push ahead with it?
Well, we already are building an app for New Zealand, but really it's quite basic provision at this point, and then it's a question of what the add-ons are, so whether or not you use GPS or Bluetooth. So what Singapore has been using is a Bluetooth app. People voluntarily sign up to it. Then if they're in contact with someone else who has the app, it can tell that. Not with huge precision, so it's not fail-safe, and it does require wide uptake. So that's going to be open-sourced within the next couple of weeks. We're already talking to the Singapore government about that app and seeing what we can pick up from them and what we can use. But it will never be the golden solution. We need to have people who can still do the job, which is what we've got, which is exactly what's needed.
So it would be voluntary, or would it be mandatory for people to sign up?
Voluntary, because these are apps. Whether you're using GPS, whether or not you're using Bluetooth, that really they are keeping a track of who you're in contact with. Now, of course, we would limit it so that information would only ever be used if you tested positive, and then it would then track who you were in contact with and let those people know. So it is a real service, but we do need people to opt in because of what we're asking of them in terms of their information.
I know you are working on what would trigger a shift from level 4 to level 3, but I'm wondering if you could tell us if it is conceivable that various parts of New Zealand could be at a different alert level at the same time. Is that an option you are anticipating?
It's an option we've always left on the table. So the things that we're looking at when we make this decision, which Cabinet will be making on the 20th of April, we'll be looking at what's our rate of transmission. So we, of course, you don't want to ever be in a position where you've got a doubling every 2 or 3 days. That means you're in a very bad place. What's happening with our clusters and community transmission, and do we have enough data at a regional level to give us confidence that we know exactly what's going on there? We've always said there might be a possibility of some parts of the country coming out of level 4 and others not. What we're really working through is could we do that successfully? So really getting into some of that detail around how you might enforce regions being at different levels. So we've left that possibility open.
Do you think it's realistic to isolate some cities and not others?
I do think it's something that we want to keep on the table as an option, because we always want to affect as few people as possible with such restrictive requirements as we have currently at level 4. And so I think it's only right that we consider, look, if we've only got an outbreak in one part of the country, do we want the entire country at that point to be in a full lockdown? But we've also got to make it work, and freight moves across our country as much as, as our people do, of course. So that's why we're really drilling into how well it would work if we operated like that.
And at some point, could it be an option where New Zealand is basically in its own bubble? If we get the number of cases down low enough that everybody is free to move around New Zealand, but you just keep our border locked down?
And borders will be key, and so there is a possibility that will be our one risk point. So we continue to have a very, very tight border control system, which we've now implemented. And if we can get down into a place where we haven't got cases that are prevalent, but we still have rigorous contact tracing and isolation for when we do, then we can lift those, and ease those restrictions. And that's what we're all working towards. So it is conceivable that that could happen.
So we could basically have a New Zealand-wide bubble, just no one coming in from the outside who's not a Kiwi.
Well, or who doesn't have, who can't show that they've got antibody, or that hasn't come in and quarantined. I think we will have to continue to have measures that can show that people, when they come in, are safe and aren't bringing in COVID-19.
And would that be until there is a vaccine?
At the moment, yes. That is ultimately either we see COVID go the way of SARS, which is that it was seasonal, or, of course, we see vaccine rapidly produced. I think the entire world will have to manage COVID until that time. What we need to do, of course, is keep making sure that we're using every possibility we have to have the smartest border that we can in the world. And we have smart borders today when it comes to biosecurity. Now we need to add to that a smart border when it comes to managing COVID-19.
I want to talk about business, because obviously a lot of businesses are suffering under this particular lockdown. Phil O'Reilly was calling earlier in the week for cash injections to businesses. Is that under active consideration?
So we opted, those countries who have used cash injections, the closest example would probably be Australia. They had a very capped cash payment in the beginning, and then you saw down the track, as they moved to heavier restrictions, you saw them come in with a form of wage subsidy. So we went straight to the wage subsidy. Our view was it gave us the ability to be more generous and make sure that we were helping employers hold on to their employees. Couple that with their other big overheads. We're working on issues around commercial lease arrangements, and also, obviously, servicing debt is a big issue for businesses. So we've talked with the banks about the work they can do on hardship and working alongside the businesses who bank with them. So that, I hope, is addressed, at least in some parts, some of those three really difficult areas for them.
Will there be anything more for business next week?
We're constantly working on making sure that as much as we're able to support business through this period of what will for many be hibernation. You've seen us work on insolvency. As I've said, we've been working on commercial rents, leases, and we've also always said that for those larger employees, we may work on bespoke initiatives to keep them ticking over. So you can expect to keep hearing about those.
Prime Minister, is a couple of days, is 2 days enough warning for businesses in terms of if the lockdown is to come off?
Actually, that'll be just notice of whether we're changing the level. We do want to give as much preparation time as possible for what those different alert levels mean. And so next week we will be going through in more detail exactly what alert level 3 will look like to help with that preparation. But what we're asking all businesses now to think about is in a situation where you are able to open again, what kind of social distancing can you build into your workplace, if any? Can you help if we have a situation where an employee or customer needs to be traced? What kind of contact tracing can you help us with? What kind of PPE might you need to use? Those are basic now, new health and safety requirements. So planning for that will ultimately really help when it comes to starting up again.
Understood.
And then on the 20th...
But the stock issue, Prime Minister, like with cafes, fresh food businesses, things like that, where stock costs them a lot of money and could go to waste if the decision doesn't go their way.
And so I wouldn't, in those areas where you do have shorter shelf lives for product, I would definitely urge that they wait until there is an announcement. We will use real-time data, but we share the data we get within a couple of hours of receiving it. We put it into the public domain. So you'll see the signs at the same time we will, and we will give the longest warning we can, but we ultimately don't want to move too soon or we risk going backwards.
There were 22,000 applications for benefits in the first week of lockdown, and you talk about sharing the signs. So what is Treasury telling you about the forecast? What can you expect around unemployment?
So one of the things that we've said that we'll do is start moving to, because of course there's a difference between forecasting and the real data that we get. And so forecasting is, as you can imagine, quite difficult at the moment. But we will start sharing some of that data weekly from work and income. So that'll give a bit of a sense of how things are tracking. And so last week, the number of people on a benefit increased by 10,000. So we know, of course, that there has been a huge impact for those in the workforce. Equally, 1 million New Zealanders are also receiving the wage subsidy.
Prime Minister, have any other leaders from around the world got in contact with you to ask advice and to ask about why and how you have done things here?
I'd say I describe it less as advice and more of just an exchange of what we're doing and what's working and the different things that we are experiencing.
So who's called you then?
I had a conversation with the Prime Minister of Sweden last night. I'm talking with the Prime Minister of Singapore in just a few short minutes. But that's us sharing ideas rather than necessarily saying whatever we're doing can just be replicated elsewhere, because our populations are different and our ways of life are different too.
But is there a curiosity about how we are doing and the numbers that we are seeing?
Yes, I think so. But equally, I have a curiosity about others too. And so I think we're all sharing right now, and that's as it should be.
Just before you go, possibly the most important question I can ask, does the Easter Bunny know where your place is?
Thankfully, Neve doesn't know what the Easter Bunny is yet, so I'm just gonna stick with that at the moment.
And what about?
But you will see, we will have eggs up in the window, just because, of course, that was something that we wanted to see out in everyone's neighbourhood, and we'll be joining in.
What about the carpet cleaners? Do they know where your place is?
Thankfully, I know a few home remedies, and I can tell you that vinegar works quite well on a black vivid.
And that was Jacinda Ardern speaking. The reference to the black vivid, well, Neve had a bit of a, mishap with the black vivid while drawing a picture of the Easter Bunny on the carpet at Premier House.